Let's talk about sleep envy. This is the topic that often comes up during my conversations with my clients. I haven't actually shared my thoughts on this topic on this channel, so I wanted to, record some video where I just share my general thoughts about these emotions and how to approach it. So maybe it will be helpful to some of you if you find yourself in a similar kind of situation with a similar experience. So, sleep envy is when we begin to compare ourselves to someone else. And usually it is someone close to us, our family members, our spouse, boyfriends, girlfriends, children, parents, even friends. So we begin to perceive that these are the people who don't have any problems with their sleep, and in comparison to them, we feel worse about ourselves because why is it that I'm having so much trouble to fall asleep? I constantly think about sleep, I worry about it. Well, another person doesn't have to do any of that, doesn't have to experience any of that, and yet they get sleep without any problems. So we begin to feel this kind of like injustice in the world, and we begin to feel bad about ourselves, but we also might start to feel resentful towards others. I know that this is the emotion that is very hard to admit sometimes because, well, it's normal that people don't want to consider themselves as an envy person. So it's completely understandable that we feel some level of pressure towards the emotion itself. It creates this kind of very interesting situation when we struggle with sleep, so there is already pressure to sleep, but then we also experience the emotion of feeling envy towards others, and we begin to feel the resistance to the emotion itself. It gets a pretty tricky situation to really move on from there without acknowledging the emotion itself. As the first step to maybe approaching this emotion is to validate that. It is completely normal to feel jealous when we see our others not struggling with sleep while we are struggling so much. So really giving ourselves permission to feel angry or envy when if it arises, is the first step to becoming free from that emotion. It doesn't really mean that we need to act from this emotion. It is not the same like acting from an emotion as just allowing emotion to arise naturally and subside naturally, because if we forbid ourselves from experiencing certain emotions, these emotions tend to stick around for longer, and they begin to kind of like spiral out of control, and then we just begin being consumed by that emotion itself. So as the kind of like the really like first steps is to recognize it is a normal human natural emotion. We are not forbidden from experiencing it, and that in itself, the way like how the brain uses this emotion is to protect us. It begins to compare ourselves to others so that it can make us to act in order to get to safety. So it uses different tools at its disposal in order for us to keep problem solving sleep. But as we know already, problem solving is something that creates the problem in the first place. So we know that this is not really helpful, but again, validating the emotion can be a really good first step in kind of like processing it. The second thing to consider is that, well, our brain perceives that other people tend to have things under control and they are great sleepers and they don't struggle. It's not actually true. No one really has the control over their sleep. So just like any human on this planet, people whom we feel jealous towards, they're also not immune against occasional sleepless night or taking a long time to fall asleep or wake up several times per night or wake up unrefreshed. They don't have the secret sauce to sleep. It's just because they haven't developed the fear around sleeplessness is what allows naturally sleep to come. But there's really no tangible physiological difference between ourselves and someone else, because in reality sleep is not something that is in control in general. We cannot force or create sleep with intention. So while the brain does this comparison job, we can also present our kind of like counter arguments by realizing that no one actually controls their sleep. So those whom we consider to be good sleepers actually don't really know how they do it. And this might sound a little bit weird, but what I found kind of soothing for myself is to realize that just because our brains, like anyone's brain, work in a similar way, and since the brain has kind of like a capacity to learn and unlearn fearful responses, anyone can actually develop fear of sleeplessness, given the right conditions for that. So let's say if we developed fear of not being asleep, that doesn't mean that someone else cannot develop it as well. Maybe when certain circumstances kind of like come together, this is when they begin to fear not not sleeping as well. So just knowing that it is not something, it is not our flaw that we develop this and not others. It's just like anyone can develop this type of fear. It doesn't mean that they will develop it, but it's not kind of excluded from the possibility. It is in similar way how think that some people are immune against getting hit by a car or having some accident happen to them. No one is immune against that. No one is protected against that. And just realizing that anyone can develop this fear can also put our minds at ease, make us feel less flawed, less like there is something wrong with us. And of course, I don't mean it in the way that, we should also, imagine our close ones getting the same kind of fear. Of course, we don't want them to suffer. No one wishes this kind of like emotion on anyone else. But just knowing that there is nothing inherently wrong with us that allowed us to develop this fear can already put our minds at ease and help us feel less pressured. Final thing is that I find that when we begin to feel this envy towards someone, it is usually a good cue to deploy self-kindness. Because when we feel we are jealous towards, I'm jealous that my partner doesn't have these problems, what we are actually doing in that, we are judging ourselves. We start this kind of like critical self-talk towards ourselves for things that we don't really control. And self-criticism and judgment are not really helpful for this journey. So I usually find that when we begin to feel this kind of like emotions, it's usually a good kind of sign to begin to deploy this self-kindness, self-compassion. And usually I find that asking questions such as, okay, what is it that I'm not doing for myself right now while I'm judging or comparing myself to others? And this type of questions, what is it that I'm not doing for myself, can give us kind of pointers which direction to look. Because instead of continuing this self-critical conversation in our minds, we begin to look for things how we can support ourselves. We recognize that first of all, it is not our fault that we are in this situation in the first place, and that we completely deserve compassion and love towards ourselves, and that we are willing to give that to ourselves. Because treating ourselves nicely during this difficult period of time can really facilitate the fundamental change that teaches the brain to feel safe again.